Hey everybody, it's Mike Meyers and Richard Chapman, two bald nerds coming together here. We're talking with National Cyber Group and in particular with CyberNow Labs now, and talking about some of the different types of situations that you guys teach, real world scenarios using real world tools. And so this time we're going to be using SIEM, is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, I figured we'd spend a few minutes looking at a SIEM tool and kind of give you an idea how that works.
SIEM is always amazing to me, Richard, because for me, it's like the edge. And so SIEM is actually SIEM, right? I have to look at my notes. Security, information, and event management, right? SIEM. Yep. And this really came out of the fact that we just had too many bells and whistles. Like in the 1960s with jet aircraft, there'd be a point where if things started messing up, there'd be these kind of warning horns and these lights going off, and it ended up confusing the pilots. So am I completely wrong by saying that SIEM tools were designed to clean up the amount of information that's coming in?
Yeah, and there's another component to it as well, too. With the growth of technology, the amount of logs that analysts would have to filter through manually would just be almost, to be honest, would probably be completely impossible. So this can do it faster, and it can do it with a level of accuracy that allows us to be able to create events that have meaning for us to be able to investigate.
Cool. So this particular tool, just because you've told me, is called QRadar by IBM, which is really one of the best in class SIEM tools out there. And what always surprises me about SIEM is, what does it read, Richard? I install this piece of software on a computer and it's probably got a web interface. It seems to me that there's a lot of engineering going on to getting SIEM tools running properly. Can you give us a little overview of what it takes just to get them there?
Yeah, quick overview. So first off, I'm not an engineer. So just to throw that disclaimer out there, but
it's because you don't have that hat.
And I definitely don't have any hair. So logs. We live and die by logs. As an analyst, those events that occur in these different devices across our network, those tell us they're a snapshot of what happened at that point in time on that particular device. So, being able to have a tool that looks at all of the logs, analyzes them to a certain degree, and then can translate them into a meaningful offense for us to be able to investigate. That's how that SIEM works. And engineers are usually very paramount in being able to tell the SIEM what it's pulling from each and every log, what information is important.
So, okay, now wait a minute, Richard. I mean, I could see where we could get a tool that could query using syslog, for example, or Windows Event Viewer, or whatever that might be. But what about my camera?
You're like for instance, if it's an IoT type device that generates.
Yeah, it's a higher end PTZ camera.
Yeah, I mean, if it does have the ability to generate logs that can be sent to a SIEM tool, you can have that SIEM tool bring those in. So we actually receive alerts occasionally, not as often in our environment here, but IoT devices like printers and things like that do generate event logs, we can see those. We can pull those into a SIEM environment and we can look at them and provide some context if there is any sort of activity that occurs on that device, or there's questionable activity on that device.
Okay, so the big thing here with this QRadar is that there's a lot of initial engineering to get it set up and running the way y'all want it.
Yes.
But we're going to assume we've got this nicely set up QRadar. And what kind of problem are we going to run into?
So first off, I'd like to say that's exactly what we have. We have an engineered QRadar. It's already set up. And we're going to actually look at, I believe it was an account login failure.
Okay.
So I'll share my screen and we'll kind of pop in there and take a look.
I'm almost more curious about what you're going to do about this as opposed to recognizing it. So
right.
Well, I'm going to try to shut up, but that's hard for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually that's a lot of what we do is, it's one thing to see a tool and to be able to understand what the tool does, but it's another thing to be able to actually function in it. So the hands-on portion, you're going to be doing this. As an analyst, you will actually be going through, looking at these offenses, investigating them, navigating the tool and understanding how it works, and then being able to actually make declarations and make recommendations for any steps that need to be done, like block an IP or block a domain, things like that. So This is again, our SOC dashboard, like we saw earlier. And if I were to click on QRadar, it would open up a new tab, which I've already done here for us just to save a little bit of time. This is an initial dashboard, and this is something that's really nice for analysts, but also for management as well, just to be able to get an overview of some of the activity that's going on in the environment. You can see some of the different higher level magnitude alerts or offenses that are being created based on activity. You can also see very active IP addresses and so forth as well. So the dashboards can be customized. This dashboard is customized for our environment, and we do go through this dashboard so analysts can understand what they're looking at as well. The great thing about a dashboard is it kind of creates a baseline. As an analyst, when you look at a dashboard every day, you notice things that stand out, that are different, items that aren't usually there. So that gives you a good indication of maybe where you can start investigating that particular day. But if we go to our offenses tab here at the top, I've actually got some of my offenses here that I pulled up. But if we were to actually go to all of the offenses, you'd be able to see all of the different offenses that are being pulled into this environment based on events that are going on in our environment. And when it does have a rule that is broken, the SIEM tool, or QRadar in this particular regard, is good at looking all of the other events and correlating those events that it think might be pertinent to this particular offense, and it pulls them in together so that you as an analyst can then look at them.
Yeah, see, this is very interesting. Richard, I've never seen this before. I can actually see that some of your stuff coming in is coming in from CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
we're not just talking about raw logs from like Windows machines or routers. There's actually a layer of stuff that's coming in that I'm sure the CrowdStrike does some amount of manipulation on it before it comes into the SIEM tool. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly. So in essence, what's happened is we have CrowdStrike as an EDR tool in our environment. And if there is an alert that is created within CrowdStrike, we don't want to have to rely on the analyst to be logging into CrowdStrike to see that alert. So CrowdStrike will, in essence, send a log over to the SIEM. And the SIEM is then going to create an offense in the tool here, and it's going to pull some of that information from the log for us. So we can see a lot of the initial information, but ultimately, if we want to, we can then pivot our investigation into the EDR tool and go even deeper. So if we see that maybe the event that occurred on an endpoint was not mitigated for some reason, we're probably going to need to pivot over to the endpoint detection and response tool, CrowdStrike in this particular instance, and take that investigation even deeper than just the SIEM level here. So yeah, it makes you much more versatile. It actually allows you to be much more organized and efficient as an analyst.
That is so cool. I've never seen anything like this before. I mean, I've certainly seen, there was a predecessor to SIEM, I forget what it's called, that would allow people to bring in different, it wasn't as fascinating as SIEM. I forget the name of the technology. Unimportant. This is better.
That might be a little before my time.
You're not missing a thing.
All right, so let me pop back over here to my offenses real fast, and I'm going to grab this real quick one here. So right off the bat, we get an idea of kind of who's involved. We can see the username. We can even see the severity. We can see IPs that are involved in this particular offense. We have a date and time. We even have a little bit of a duration here too. So we have a lot of information right on the very first initial look without even digging in too far. But if I double click on the offense itself, it's going to take me into the offense summary page. And on this offense summary page, I get a really good overview of what's going on. I've got a great description here, login failure to an expired account. So we have an account that's expired. Somebody tried to log in to that particular environment. Now, I happen to know these two IPs. So this first IP is our firewall. So this appears to be coming from a firewall log, which makes sense. Sure. But we also have another IP here too. We even have the ability to search for our IPs in our environment. We have a tool here called Op Manager. So one of the first components of an investigation is knowing, what am I dealing with? Like, what devices are involved in this? So you can look up those IPs and see what they are, understand what those devices are, and just from the very beginning, from your knowledge of, networking and security plus and so forth, hopefully that gives you at least a little bit of an idea of what kind of traffic or what type of traffic you should be seeing. And that could indicate to you as the analyst some things that stand out, some things that maybe don't fit, which one of these doesn't belong kind of situations, which is pretty cool.
And I think the other thing would be important is that you should have memorized most of the network IDs within your data center / LAN / whatever, is that a fair statement?
It is to a certain degree. You will get used to certain ones. Like for instance, the firewall is an easy one. You see that a lot with network traffic, so that gets really easy to identify. In some of your larger enterprise networks, though, it can be increasingly difficult to know every single IP. I can tell you in some of the SOC organizations I was in, we had a network list. It basically was more or less a network diagram or a spreadsheet that listed all of the different devices and what their IPs were. So
Sure.
as an analyst, you could reference that to know what devices you're looking at.
Okay.
Now you can also see, if you build it out, there's also an assets tab here too. So you can actually accomplish the same thing within the SIEM by including all of your assets in the assets tab as well too. So another nice little feature of the SIEM tool. This user might be an existing user. Maybe their password just expired. This might be an old account that someone's trying to take advantage of. We don't really know at the moment. So the events that QRadar is providing for us will allow us to get an idea of what some of those events are, and hopefully give us an idea of what type of activity we're seeing here. Now we see some different event entries here. This is a relatively small one. There's only a few events here. Now, in the larger ones, I like to actually sort them by event name. And the reason why I do that is because that gives me one line for each different type of an event.
I see what you're doing. Okay.
If you're dealing with an event that's got 25 different types of events, and in each event there's 100 different individual logs, that gets pretty heavy. There's a lot of information. So just sorting it by the different types of events will sometimes give me an overview, an idea. Now, this first one I can see is just the rule, okay? And in essence, how a SIEM works to create an offense, there's a list of rules. If the rule is broken, it creates an offense. It pulls in events that are correlated and gives that to the analyst to be able to investigate. We teach you how to investigate that, right? That's what the hands-on does. Now, the rule itself isn't really going to give us much other than understanding why the actual rule triggered. And there's actually a way to see that. If we go here to our rules, we can actually look at the rule, and to be able to understand that rule better and to understand why it triggered. So for instance, this one is telling us to apply the description that we have here, login failure to expired account, on events where or which are detected by the local system, and when an event matches any of the following. And these are specific criteria. For instance, in this particular case, there's a authentication to an expired account. So when there's an attempt to log into an expired account, it creates this rule so that we as analysts go in and look at it. What might be a difference is how many events there are. If I see just a couple of events, it could be that that person's password just expired, and that would look like normal login activity. But if I saw 10,000 events here, so 10,000 events to try to log in, that's going to actually look more like a brute force attack. Sure. That's going to look like somebody is trying to use, a rainbow table or something to that regard to try to log into that account and see if they can brute force their way in to that account so they have access to that environment. And as analysts, being able to take the knowledge that you've gained from your certifications, your studies, your education, and put it to an actual, to put it to play, to put it into work right here is really what makes the difference, in my opinion. So kind of nice there. But going back to those specific events themselves, whoop, let me get rid of that. Sorry, close out, go away. There we go. So we've got our events. This first one again is that rule. The second one, I can go in and actually look at the event itself, and it'll kind of give me a little bit of a record. If there's a lot of events, I can see a graphical representation of those events, which is kind of nice. But also, I can go in to the log itself and look at the log. Now, this particular log has been engineered. This is where those engineers come into play, because what they've done is they've gone in and they've taken the log and they've said, we want to pull this information. Like, we want to pull the username from the log. We want to pull the device name from the log. We want to pull the Windows event ID number from the log, okay? And the cool thing is, down here at the bottom, you can also see the log itself. So here is the raw log that's actually providing that information that we as analysts are now looking at. In the old days, you'd have to actually look at this log every single time. And trust me, there are still times where it's valuable to look at the log, look at the actual payload. But being able to parse that information out makes it a lot more easy, and makes a lot more sense as an analyst to be able to be efficient. So,
hey, a real quick sidebar on internal networks, is IPv6 taking over?
To be honest, everything that we're using in our environment is still IPv4. We have not, not that I've seen in the tools, and not that I've seen in our particular networks and environments. I don't know exactly when or what kind of process is going to be involved in making that switch. But everything we see is generally IPv4.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing, and I've always been curious about that. You'd always think that the data centers and those types of networks would be the most edgy, and it seems to be exactly the opposite. Sorry, I didn't mean to make a sidebar. I was just curious.
No, that's okay. I think there's probably, like anything else, when there's change, there's reluctance to change.
Sure.
So,
sure.
Well, why change if we don't have to, kind of thing. I can see that, I guess, to a certain degree, but eventually we'll probably be forced to, right? So, in any case, as an analyst, you're going to basically look at these events. You're going to start making determinations. You're going to look at those things. Like, for instance, I mentioned a minute ago, there's only really 6 events here. So this doesn't appear to me as a brute force type attack. What I could do, there's a couple different steps that I could take here. I could reach out to the user and notify them. If I'm working an internal network, I can reach out to that user and say, hey, we received an alert. Did you have any problems logging in today? And they can verify that. We can actually do that through our chat service here in our environment as well. We use Slack. So that's a normal everyday occurrence there. We could also reach out to the help desk and ask the help desk, hey, is this account valid? Is this an account that should be closed out where nobody's using this? That can, give us some insight as to whether this is a potentially malicious activity as well too. And then, of course, if you have IP addresses from externally, which in this particular case, we really don't, we're dealing with internal activity here. We could actually then look and see, is this somebody from outside? Like, if we saw a public or a public IP address here, some IP in China or Germany or the Netherlands or something like that, we could look at the history and the reputation on that IP, and that might give us an indication as to what's going on as well too. So yeah, being able to do these investigations in a SIEM tool makes things a lot faster and a lot more efficient. And Mike, I'm going to turn things back over here to you. I think that's probably a good idea of what it is that we do here as far as teaching analysts how to do these investigations and make these determinations. But, the knowledge is one thing, but the hands-on is another. And I love being able to help people learn how to do this so that they can translate that into their SOC organization as well.
No, absolutely. And I think this always really boils down to the true hands-on. Like when I'm teaching like CompTIA Network Plus or Security Plus, so many times I get people going, how do you remember all these port numbers? So I was like, use the port numbers, just use them all the time. Or how can you tell a private IP address versus a public IP address? I was like, use them. But they're like, no, we want you to make us a table so we can memorize them. I got a better idea. Use them. And that definitely looks like what CyberNow Labs is doing there. And I think this is definitely, well, I know it is the key to your all success, and why you guys are generating so many amazingly well-received, and I might add, highly paid analysts out there with every cohort. It's just a great job you guys do. In fact, guys, I love them so much, I invested in the company myself. So it does a great job. Richard, thank you so much, man. Once again, a great show. I really appreciate you. Teach me so much every time I talk to you.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I love spending time with you as well too. So thank you very much. And yeah, look forward to the next time we get to spend some time together.
All right, man. Later, Tater.
Have a good one.
Bye.